Welcome to the BrettJohnson.biz podcast, where we discuss business on purpose, radically fresh leadership, capital that transforms society, and marketplace stories that embolden difference makers. Welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. I'm Brett Johnson, together with Baolerhu Ligden. Baolerhu, welcome. Good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So Baolerhu is coming to us out of Northern California at the moment, but that's not where you grew up, right, Baolerhu?
That's correct. I grew up a distant land and a place called Mongolia, a Mongolian community. They actually split my childhood in Mongolia side, but also China side in the Inner Mongolia. So our family on the both sides, basically, that's how I grew up.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it'd be great to hear a bit more about that. Mongolia used to be the largest empire in the world once upon a time, that stretched all the way from Mongolia all the way into Europe in terms of its reach. Just an amazing historical story. But today we don't know too much about it, and it's been less on the radar. So when you grew up, as I understand it, tell us a bit about your early life, your family. You were part of a nomadic family, is that right? Ranching and so forth?
Correct. So I grew up on I call it half nomad lifestyle. So my parents grew up on basically middle of nowhere. It's still about, a couple hours to the closest township, and township is about, I would say probably like 500 people. So we follow different seasons. We call it summerland and winterland. So I grew up on almost like a mobile, I call it yurt, in Mongolian word, we call it ger, G-E-R. So it's a mobile home kind of lifestyle until almost 7 or 8. We move twice a year. Or 3 times a year, sometimes up to the rating situation, waterfall, and so on. Raising cattle and sheep, and my parents also basically take care of all the animals and livestock, and me and my younger brother help out around the ranch, and that's how I grew up. I know that's a very unusual lifestyle compared with today's urban life and pretty much around the world. I think one of the last place nomadic lifestyle still exists is in Mongolian community in Central Asia. And we still about 30% of our population in country of Mongolia still live in the lifestyle that I grew up, very similar to where I grew up.
So your kids, and you have quite a few kids, do they hear you say often, well, when I grew up, we didn't have an iPhone, I had a horse, etc. Do you tell them the stories?
I try not to, in some sense, it's, if they're interested in, I ask them here and there. And yesterday was very interesting. I was actually sketching a picture on an architectural picture on a community center we're building. And then my daughter loves designing things, and she's 9, and she's sitting next to me, and she started asking a lot of questions like, oh, when you were a kid, did you have this and no on? So, we're global citizens. We lived from the most isolated place to the modern world, to the third world to first world. All things I have experienced, and I noticed that I can't impose things that my kids haven't seen and experienced, and just based on what I went through, or what it's not a good or bad. It's just that's where God, raised us. And this is, my kids are going to grow up more like Californian rather than, native Mongolians. So if they're interested, I'd love to expose them to them. I'd love to take them to trips and help them to understand there's different way of living. No one is better than the other. There's a lot of good values in every type of lifestyles. Yeah.
I like what you said, Baolerhu, about being a global citizen. And I feel that when people become followers of Jesus, we should shred their passports and give them kingdom passports in one way, because that's our primary identity. And yet we come from a place. So in your early years, from what I understand, you probably didn't grow up in a Christian family, right? What were the predominant religions in Mongolia at the time?
In our community, predominant religion is nominal Buddhism.
Yeah,
However, Buddhism has been around about 500 years in our community since
yeah,
probably about 15th century, 16th century started really kind of exploding.
yeah,
When one of the Mongolian Empire, one of the king actually took over Tibet, and
yeah,
he basically liked the ideology and brought massive Tibetan Buddhism into our culture, and then later on it kind of expanded.
yeah,
However, it's not that simplistic because that part of the world also went through geopolitical change. Communism came in last 70 years, really wiped out quite a bit of things
yeah,
traditionally we had existed in the community.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the oldest religion was shamanism.
yeah,
Buddhism was nominal. I call it nominal because it's weakened quite a bit because communism really kind of took the root out of it, and whatever is left good of it, it was gone. And
yeah,
then so it's a kind of distorted version of Buddhism in a sense. And then you have a lot of atheist view, and so down people religiously people say they're Buddhist because it's just like cultural Christians. If you grew up here in the South, my ancestors were Christians, so I guess I'm Christian. So
yeah,
it's the same way. That's how they say. But in their behavior, I think majority of people live very much godlessness, and that's where I kind of grew up with a culture surrounded with that kind of
yeah.
environment.
So, Baolerhu, when you and Bilgun visited us here in Tennessee a little while ago, we chatted a bit about the history of your country and the lost missions opportunity that there was back, I think, probably in the 1200s, right, when there was a request from the emperor to bring in missionaries, and that didn't happen. Do you want to unpack that story a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's in my opinion, it's one of the classic case study you can use on a mission movement.
Yeah,
When invitation come, when God opened doors, how God's people respond or not respond, and what
yeah,
it takes, the risk and all of that.
mm,
And during 12th century, when Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, took over basically China, he reestablished the capital, southern capital in Beijing City, today's Beijing. And then in the West, the voice and exploring the land and different things. A lot of people started kind of learning about the East through a man's biography. That's a gentleman named Marco Polo.
yeah,
And then, Marco Polo actually described his biography in a prison, and then basically his own story is basically during Silk Road, he met Kublai Khan, and
yeah,
he became one of his actually close advisor in many situations, foreign affair, trade, and even finance and different things. And he
yeah,
became the messenger between the East and West.
yeah,
And he established the trust relationship with Kublai Khan and described his faith and then faith in God and faith in church and why Christianity is superior in terms of in that time of the history that for faith and for redemption and all kind of purposes. So anyway, Kublai Khan ended up inviting Marco Polo, said, if your faith is that good, I'm running, he's basically running a part of the world that's pluralistic and have all kind of faith, all kind of ethnicity, and said, what can I bring the unity among these people? Is actually having a common faith, a faith that they can fear God. So he basically challenged Marco Polo, said, if your faith is superior, I would love to see that. And could you bring that? Bring your teachers and messengers, and could you bring your pastors and priests to kind of educate our people. In
yeah,
that sense, I'm open to learn.
yeah,
And then Marco Polo went back to Italy. Back in the days, Silk Road is like take months, 10-month plus journey to head back.
yeah,
And went back and went to the Catholic priest back then, and then said to the Pope that, hey, this is a Eastern Empire, the Mongolian Empire. The king really wants to, embrace us and interested in it. So he actually organized a group of basically they specifically asked they want 100 priests.
yeah,
So they organized a group of priests and leaders and started, traveling towards east. But Silk Road and that journey is not an easy route. a lot
Yeah.
of war, a lot of people get sick, so many things. So ended up majority of people either died or some of them actually got discouraged and didn't continue the journey. So
Yeah.
the story ended with Marco Polo returning to Beijing, meeting up Kublai Khan with his uncle and just very few couple people. And then basically Kublai Khan told him, if your people, your priest doesn't have faith in this, why would I turn my nation to you?
Yeah.
Basically, it's a great challenge of where is our faith and all of that. So
Yeah.
that become a historical moment that I think really changed the rest of the history. That
Yeah.
I think Christianity never kind of became big or flourished in that part of the world because of that singular decision.
Yeah, an amazing story. So a request for 100 priests and then two or three show up, and it's just such a lost opportunity. And I feel that we're in the same space in the marketplace today. I think that marketplace people outside the church are open to faith. They want to understand something about God, but they want to see it in practice, and they want us to go to them. They don't want it to be, oh, we've got to go to where they are. And yeah, we just don't want to lose those opportunities again. So fascinating story. Thanks for unpacking that. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're somewhat nomadic, semi-nomadic, and then your parents, they decided to do something with your education. Where did you get educated?
Yeah, so my that side of family was dispersed all over the different place, and that a lot to do with communism and cultural revolution and genocide and all of that. So because of that, for a period of time, the dark ages from 50s to 60s, always almost to mid 70s,
Hmm.
my dad's side of family basically went through a lot of hardship. And the reason my dad actually moved to countryside wasn't that he's actually a more urban person. He moved to countryside to running away from the genocide, and all
Yeah,
his brothers and sisters were dispersed all over the country and region. And ended up one of his youngest brother returned and met him, and he was very well educated, and later on went to study in New Zealand and so on. So he's the young man came to my dad and said, "Look, your kids are smart. Uh, you know, give them an opportunity in this little place. Of course, you sheltered him, and many things are good. He's learning a lot of good things in character and many things in hardship. But if you give him an opportunity to study, he
yeah,
might, you know, be somebody very different." So because of his encouragement, my dad actually took a risk and sent me to boarding school since I was very young, since I was basically 8 years old.
yeah,
8 years old, imagine, you go to like 300 miles away, go to boarding school. It's a big deal for me. But
yeah,
that's also changed the trajectory of my life. And from a ranching and farming small community, very few kids actually go this route. Even today, if I go back, all my childhood friends who know me before 8, I mean, their life very much didn't change. They were still back home and
yeah,
raising cattle and sheep, and none of them went to college. And so basically, that boarding school life changed my journey of kind of
yeah.
studying different places, going to capital city, going to different type of school, and learning English and so on. Yeah.
Fantastic. And your faith journey, how did that mix into your life? At what point did that begin to develop?
Yeah, I think that a lot to do with also educational journey and going to high school. I ended up this premium high school in a capital city of Inner Mongolia, and that school was the first school ever taught trilingual education. It's the
Okay.
first ever school basically implemented English education along the side was what we have learning Mongolian and Mandarin Chinese. And
Mm.
then it's the first school actually, brought English teachers to the foreign teachers to the. I mean, think about imagine early 90s.
Yeah,
Communism just ended in Soviet, and that part of the world, including China, no, even China, was very optimistic.
yeah,
Everything about trade, learn. So Mongolia was same, very much okay. Let's embrace things from the West, democracy, capitalism, English education. A lot of these things were all happening at the same time. And I was teenager, 13 years old, landed in big city in the school that is a pilot program. Only 30 kids were selected to be this pilot program. I was one of the 30, and that certainly God had a plan and changed the destiny of my life. And
Mm.
not only learn English, but I think really along the journey is that I got to, if I didn't know the language, I wouldn't be able to communicate with missionaries. I wouldn't be understanding what they're sharing. So that
Right.
became the main source, and then ended up hearing about Jesus and gospel message from my two English teachers during my second year of high school.
Yeah.
And it was, for me, that was pretty radical in a
Yeah.
sense, because the message is so countercultural to what I've learned in
Yeah.
religion or any format. And so
Yeah.
that attracted me to Christian faith, and I accepted Jesus when I was in high school.
Yeah. And how many people in Mongolia, what percentage were believers at the time? Was this a fairly new thing or was this?
Yeah, so in a macro level, a lot of mission agencies today they proclaim that early 90s, particularly 1990, there was only identified 4 Christians in the
Yeah.
entire nation. And
Mm.
if you're familiar with this term, unreached and unchurched people
Yeah.
group and so on, we were as at large, probably, in country of Mongolia plus diaspora Mongolian, we're all considered unreached and unchurched people group. So
Yeah.
in a sense, there's very few believers.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate about, I probably told you the story, but not, when I accepted Christ, gospel in my teacher's dorm, my English teacher's dorm, and he started crying, and I didn't know why he was crying. I
Yeah.
thought I was the one supposed to cry. I didn't know what to do. I accepted Jesus. I'm trying to comfort this adult, and it was such an odd moment. I didn't know what to do. And basically, he said, "Well, young man, I have a good news for you and bad news for you. Uh, uh, the good news is that welcome to the kingdom of God. You're gonna have brothers, sisters all over the world.
Yeah.
Your life gonna be welcomed. God is welcoming you, and
Yeah.
your brothers, sisters all over the world are celebrating your salvation."
Yeah.
But bad news is, he said, well, as far as I know, you're one of the first few believers, literally a couple hundred young people accepted Jesus in this, about 4 million Mongolian people live in this part
Yeah.
of the world.
Yeah.
So you really don't have much support.
Mhm.
You don't have a church that is identified who is, teaching in Mongolian right now, and
Yeah.
Bible is only translated for gospel book, and it's printed on this little white paper. Is that this is the Bible you got, So that was my kind of humble beginning of my faith journey.
So your initial Bible, you guys had just a paper stapled together, and that was the
Stay
gospel.
put together. It's a beta version. I think some either Wycliffe or some sort of Bible translation agency worked with missionaries, and they were working on the translation. And then the translation wasn't actually finalized. It's considered beta. So when we were even like post high school, uh, literally we would read it and we wouldn't understand it because the translation was so bad that we wouldn't understand it. It's like it's worse than reading King James. So it's very disconnected in a sense. So we'll literally read notes, and when we were in college, we will take notes and send it back to the translators. And as they work through one book, they will send a beta to a local church. And
Yeah.
especially when we were in college, we will receive these beta version, and then we'll use them and then write notes. If you do a
Yeah.
Bible study, a different thing, we'll write notes, and then every month I'll collect those notes and send them to the Bible translators, and
Yeah.
then as a feedback. So
Yeah.
that was pretty interesting time. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Do you stay in Mongolia or did you move elsewhere?
So I went to school and did my undergrad in Inner Mongolia, China, and then I basically involved in still Inner Mongolia, roughly still a lot of ethnic Mongolians. So I spent a lot of time in my early days, kind of serving college student ministry, And
Yeah.
back then, it's very interesting. It's not like that was the only ministry existed because gospel was not in the countryside. It was not
Yeah.
in the adult population. Only people who accepted Jesus were teenagers and college students.
Okay.
So the college student ministry, youth ministry, that's the center of the church, basically.
Right.
That's all
Yeah.
you got. And
Yeah.
spent quite a bit of time there on my college days and early 20s.
Yeah.
But I just, as a very curious and hungry kid, I always ask very sophisticated questions and different things, and get in an argument with missionaries and things that sometimes is just endless of critics and different things. And, one of them was like, I always ask, like, they said, well, God created everything, but then you ask missionaries, what does God to do with economy? And then
Yeah.
most of the missionaries like no idea about that. And
Yeah.
then they were like, oh, just focus on your church, just do ministry, just share evangelism. That's
Yeah.
discipleship. That's all matters. But
Yeah.
then it's like, well, but what about this life? What about this? So many things.
Yeah.
What about justice? What about so many things in our history? Doesn't
Yeah.
God care about any of those? So
Yeah.
there's this kind of disintegration of
Yeah.
message and what the Christianity is teaching us and wants us to be, that was kind of disconnected. I think
Yeah.
in a sense, as a local believer, very young, I know there was something is missing, and part of it is searching that answer to it. Part of it is just kind of my discontent with my own spirituality and where I was kind of stuck.
Mm.
Wanted to study abroad, and people pointed me towards coming to US, and I'm pretty entrepreneurial and liked about business back in the days, and started kind of thinking like, hey, maybe first time I ever heard about business is mission, things
Mhm.
like kingdom business. That was a very kind of, nobody was talking about it around me, but I got hold of a couple articles and books, and that really inspired me. I wanted to be, I really think there's a means, businesses have much more bigger purpose in that and have means to serve the community. But church is not teaching that. Church
Yeah.
discourages that, and there's a lot of marginalization. So yeah, 2005, I came to America, actually in your part of the world, and
Yeah.
not too far away from you, a town named Knoxville, and I went to their school there to study
Yeah.
business. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. And did you spend some time in China as well on the way? Was that before you came to the US or afterwards?
Before and after both.
Okay.
Before was more like on a college, undergrad, school
Yeah.
kind of settings, and then it's
Yeah.
not much, involved in the society and business because
Yeah.
when you're a
Yeah.
student, your circle is so small.
Mm.
Uh, and then post school here in Tennessee, I worked a couple jobs, and one of them ended up working for a medical technology firm in Knoxville, Tennessee, who was it was experiencing like huge growth
Mm.
and potentially kind of expanding their market to other part of the world, serving the cancer kind of market. And then, of course, Asia, there's all kind of opportunities, and I kind of facilitated some of that dialogue, initial exploring, and then basically help them, launch their office in China, did an initial research development, and then also initial kind of, you know, country entry strategy and different things. And so I ended up moving to Shanghai and for about 6.5 years.
What caused you to ask these questions? Because you saw that the missionaries weren't talking about broader life. They were talking about the church and faith and so forth. In the Mongolian culture, is it a more integrated view of the world, or was it just coming out of how you're wired?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's not the culture itself is more integrated. I think Buddhism came and disintegrated our culture.
Okay.
Communism came, compartmentalized everything. So
Yeah.
it's really, but I didn't it like, I think everywhere, if you talk to anybody from any part of the world, people are looking for something more wholeness,
Yes.
something more like, hey, spirituality, isn't it just belong on Sunday morning, that 2 hour, or is it my
Yeah.
private life, or is it actually about everything? I think humans so yearn for that. And
Yeah.
then I think I had that yearning since I was very small kid. I was discontent with how Buddhism, my religious community around me.
Yeah.
Example would be my parents, very young, I recall, like 6, 7 years old. Consciously, I would stand outside of temple, Buddhist temple, and I wouldn't walk in. And my
Yeah.
parents will ask me, why would you want to go in? I said, well, first you walk in, look, all the statues. It's all scary.
Yeah.
It was not, it's never, I don't feel any peace. I go in and it's out of fear,
Yeah.
telling me something to. And the second I told them, look around the temple. Everybody like live around the temple are poor, alcoholic, broken and all. But the temple has the most wealth. What
Yeah.
is this? What's going on here? If
Yeah.
they represent God, aren't they supposed to take care of these people rather
Yeah.
than living off these people? So
Yeah.
this kind of thing, very young, I guess, I have a little sense of justice in me
Yeah.
always, and
Yeah.
always, looking for something since I was young.
Wow.
And then I think that's a part of it is probably how God wired me. But
Yeah.
I think it's also the more you know about our God, and He wants to give us, a flourishing life. His
Yeah.
purpose is not just personal salvation.
Yeah.
I think we dumb it down to very, very, very small basic and say, well, you
Right.
get saved, you go to heaven. That's it. Rest of the thing, and that kind of approach didn't settle with me very
Yeah.
early days. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's about just saving soul only.
Yeah.
God do have a plan to redeem the whole humanity, and He has a plan to bring the heaven to the earth. And there's so much He needs to do, individually in our heart, but also
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
homes, collectively in society, culture. There's so many things needs to be done.
Right.
I think that part of redemption and restoration part of gospel
Yeah.
I wasn't exposed to it in early
Right.
days. And that's why it was something I've sensed there's something missing. And the more you learn, read your Bible, realize that wasn't that wasn't the case. God certainly had a different thing, but we
Yeah.
only lived this small part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. So just take it back a little bit. And when a bunch of teenagers go to boarding school, they meet some missionaries, they become believers. When at some point you're going to go back and tell your family, hey, this is what's going on. What was the response of the family to these teenagers coming back? Was there acceptance? Was there rejection? How did that work?
So one of the reason I do look at, during my teenage years when I accepted Jesus, my high school buddy, almost 7, 8 boys all accepted Jesus around the same
Right.
window.
Yeah.
So my class actually have 17 boy graduated. 7 of them accepted Jesus, including myself.
Mm.
So I look at, sometimes we even nowadays we're still friends, and a lot of us are,
Yeah.
a colleague in kingdom, and some have become pastor, and some are still serving in ministry. We have our reunion. Here and there, when we talk about that, what is the reason we came to Christ in the first place? And
Yeah.
we realize we all are yearning for Father's love.
Wow.
And then that's something, a commonality that I think we all shared after the
Mm.
genocide, after the Cultural Revolution. There's
Right.
tremendous amount of deep brokenness in homes,
Mm.
fatherlessness, and young men seeking his, security and loved and
Yeah.
approval and safe relationships.
Yeah.
I think Christianity played a significant role through missionaries and some redemptive relationship people, but also God Himself, His own character,
Yeah.
attracted us in that
Yeah.
sense. So now you have a different ideology, you become Christian, and now you're going home. And then only time you go home is summer break and winter break because you're in the city.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, oh, all this hyped up with young people. And then you go home and you got so much discouragement. So 50-50. 50% of homes look at their kids as like, okay, this is teenager. So I guess there's something going on with their hormones. And, I don't know what to do with them. And then
Yeah.
the other 50 is like completely radical. They were like, now you chose a different religion, different ideology. Now including my father-in-law, sometimes joke with my wife and I said, you guys call your God Father, more sincerely than you call me Father. So it's such a, you know, um, so basically competing priority.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
a lot of homes literally rejected their kids. And
Yeah.
I have friends, buddies that went through a lifelong rejection from their parents that once you chose, this foreign religion, you're not part of us anymore. Don't come
Wow.
in, literally, completely deserted their kid. And then that caused, they come to God for healing, but then after that also caused a lot of pain and rest of their kind of spiritual growth and
Yeah.
Christian walk. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's really by, I was by God's grace. My parents were very open-minded in a
Yeah.
sense. They basically said, son, I was very scared when I first time actually told my dad about it. I still remember where I sit. I still remember my hands were sweating. I don't know what to do, but I was just telling him I have a new kind of choice I made, and this is I believed, and this is what's happening. And my dad actually listened through everything, and then he said one thing that was very, very comforting to me. And he said, "Well, son, from the day mommy and daddy we made decision put you to boarding school, we know that we're giving you away.
Yeah.
We know that part of you, you're going to become different. You're going to
Yeah.
choose a life that is completely different than us. So we already at that point we calculated the risk and we accepted the reality. You will come back differently. So this is part of it. So we gotta take you as you are. So that was such a. I mean, they still today. My parents are not believer.
Yeah.
They're not against it. They don't try to speak into our kids and or us and try to judge us and in many sense,
Mm.
but in one sense I had their blessings, and that
Yeah.
was such a huge deal in our
Sure.
culture because when
Yeah.
your seniors, your parents, your community bless you rather than kind of curse you, try to push you out,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
your security sense of belonging, everything,
Yeah.
it becomes so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward, Baolerhu, in your story. So you work in the corporate, you're selling medical related stuff, 6 or so years, you're traveling all over the world, no doubt, out of Shanghai, having a busy life. And but now you've switched out of that. You're no longer sitting in a corporate. What was the transition point and what did you move into?
Yeah, I that season, I do believe God did call me there, and
Mm.
through relationships, through affirmation of what I wanted to do, and excitement of the market and business
Yeah.
opportunity ahead of us. And I always want to, practice what I always pursued, not only business and faith.
Yeah.
Even running medical technology from company, I was very much involved in faith and work dialogues and serving local business people in Chinese community and hanging out with young professionals, uh, you know, all of that. Even the
Yeah.
business we're doing is very important because
Yeah.
their cancer rapidly growing in Asia and bringing new solution, new healing
Yeah.
and methodology to the patient. That's such a redemptive,
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
However, corporate is corporate. There are things that I feel like towards the end of it, I feel much more discontent and discontent as, hey, this is the corporate letter. You take care of our goal and vision and goals.
Yeah.
We'll take care of you. But your passion, increasingly, they basically said your passion, what you care about kingdom, what you care about ministry, that you need to leave it outside. Do it
Yeah.
on your Sunday, do it your, spare times. Well, that being said, I don't even have spare time anymore because it's a over demanding job, and
Yeah.
there's some point I feel like this is endless, and
Yeah.
particularly with my conviction of I went to Shanghai single and I got
Yeah.
married with my wife Bill Gun, and we had two kids, and we realized the direction trajectory we're going with this job is not going to align with what we want in our marriage. Our
Yeah.
marriage was suffering. I was away from home all the time, not being around my kids, burned out, not
Yeah.
didn't feel like valued in many sense. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, anytime I can replace you kind of sense. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that, and then also digger dipping, like, okay, looking at my calling. I think as a Christian we care about how we live on this earth,
Mm.
so our calling and that kind of thing determined that maybe that chapter needs to be closed, and then to start something new. So
Yeah.
there's I think it's a deeper, more searching of meaning and purpose of life, and
Yeah.
how do I live? What is my gift and talents? How do I live that intentionally? I think that was a journey that I have experienced post Shanghai.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, there are some people who are called to the corporate life forever. I mean, that's what they do. They retire there, they go through that, and it is a calling to be involved there. And yeah, we want our career and our calling to be integrated for sure. We know that. But there are sometimes pivot points when God says to you, okay, this is the trajectory of where it's going, and there's that rising discontent within you that you're not going to fulfill your life purpose if you stay where you are. So was it an easy transition out of corporate? What did you do next?
Honestly, it wasn't that easy. For us, it's not just changing a job. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces and targets, and part of it is like, where do we live? Move my family. I mean,
Mm.
so it's not just my career change. It's actually where do we settle our family? How we operate out
Yeah,
of where, and what kind of life. I mean, it's just when you have young kids, there's a lot of that additional
yeah, yeah,
decision and that associated with your decision that is very complex. It's not a
yes,
singular
yeah,
matter. So took me a while. Took me about 6 months. I took some time off from work, and then
yeah,
also kind of soul searching of
yeah,
like God. For personally, I want to be, I want to not only be, productive about my life and effective in my life, but I want to build a life that actually relevant to my kids and be around them, and it's more integrated life. Well, where would that be? What would that do?
yeah,
So it's a lot of it searching, and I think around that time I took a like a sabbatical. I took
yeah,
a backpacking trip to Mongolia. I think that trip was very significant in my opinion because that trip, I had all the options open to God. I prayed deeply. I said, would you show me, what would you like to? Every conversation I'm going to have, meetings have, lunch I'm going to have with people, uh, including visiting local churches, talking to pastors, entrepreneurs, politicians, my high school buddies, so whoever I talk to, I know you are, you are part of this. And
yeah,
show me how do I live my life should
mm,
be, meeting people's needs and see
yeah,
what to do. And I think that trip, I think a couple of things came up very significantly. One
yeah,
is I revisited my community after many years
yeah,
remotely supporting them, but not really
yeah,
within the proximity that much. And then going back and seeing how gospel has grown, gospel community has grown, church has grown, but also bigger problems exist in different part of the community functions. And then
yeah,
also see opportunities. Being an
yeah,
entrepreneur, one of the greatest things is like you sit there and you're like, oh wow, there's opportunity everywhere.
yeah,
But not everybody think like that, but
yeah,
entrepreneurs think it that way.
yeah,
And then also like, oh, looking at your own deposit and say, hey, what could we do on this area? So kind of
yeah,
running different scenarios in your mind.
yeah,
And then I think one thing that helpful to me is having a lot of dialogue with my wife. What kind of,
yeah,
in the end of the day, where do we live and how do we have a lifestyle instead of just a career? you
yeah,
know Look at our lifestyle, a lifelong
yeah,
kind of much more bigger
yeah,
lifestyle. How are we going to raise our kid? What do we do? What the rhythm of life we can have? And then also have a coach, executive coach actually sat down with me, clarified quite a bit of things. And of course, I think the hardest part is risk. From corporate working to do what I do today from a missional entrepreneurial route, it's quite a risk. It's you're
yeah,
walking away from financial security, walking away with a lot of things.
yeah,
At least for short run, long run,
yeah,
I'm not sure. You can be an
yeah,
entrepreneur, you can build wealth,
yeah,
but for short run, you have a life,
right,
quality adjustment and different things. So that
yeah,
was a big, big decision we had to
yeah,
make and a risk we have to take. Yeah.
yeah, very good, very good, yeah. So talk to us a bit about what you're doing now in terms of your life today. What are your focus areas right now?
Yeah. So today last few years, since I settled in Northern California, being an entrepreneur is like, okay, as long as there's internet, uh, as long as there's an airport
Yeah.
and I can live wherever, I can do
Yeah.
something. I literally believe that
Yeah.
because, I'm not a digital native, but I also understand where the future of technology had to,
Yeah.
how we
Yeah.
can remotely work, how do we do stuff. I
Yeah.
think in a corporate really helped us to taste it that a little bit that ministry sometimes doesn't understand.
Yeah.
So we basically settled here, and last few years I started a non-for-profit, basically kind of very close to my heart and
Yeah.
passion about. I want to see gospel advance. I want to see community transform. I want to see leadership development. I want to see spiritual and economic development in
Yeah.
Mongolia, more holistic change.
Yeah.
So our non-for-profit addressed that. Alongside, in order to pay bills, I also started a couple of small business kind of supplement our bills and different things. But I think if you look back, it's really the probably the best time.
Mm.
Probably from corporate level, my income still haven't adjusted to the point yet. But I
Yeah.
do feel like my joy level, my fulfillment level is like 10 times, 100
Yeah.
times much
Yeah.
higher than
Yeah.
my last chapter.
Wow. Fantastic. Great. So you
Yeah,
set up the Asia Leadership Development Network, right?
correct.
And I know that you're doing some conferences and other things. Tell us about, is that to bring about transformation primarily in Asia?
Yeah, I wanted to pick a name bigger than Mongolia. Part of it is, yeah, our sweet spot is Mongolia, and that's where we're gonna start. But
Yeah.
during my years of travel, and I realized whatever is happening in Mongolia is not an isolated incident. It's
Yeah.
actually common patterns in nearby regions.
Right.
But being an entrepreneur, we also know how to, pilot stuff and prototype, and you
Yeah.
can't pick big enough, so such a big market, and
Yeah.
spread all over the place and prototype. You pick a small enough pond and
Yeah.
control risk, and that's where Mongolia is. I do believe
Yeah.
that's where we have the relationship capital. That's where we have all the significant smaller pool of Christians, and
Yeah.
then also Christianity is very young. Average, by the
Yeah.
way, average Christian is only 22 years old. 70% of church is under 35 years old. It's a great place to test
Yeah.
new ideas when you
Great.
have that vibrant. Yeah, so we picked Mongolia, but then we really have a Catholic mind, which is
Yeah.
basically whatever works, can scale it to other places and test it in different markets and
Yeah.
allow or share our playbooks in whatever way. So that's how we set it up. So at Asia Leadership Development Network, we work in this four major area.
Yeah.
One is faith and work. We teach
Yeah.
faith and work as it's part of integration. Church. When I visited Mongolia back in 2016 during this kind of due diligence journey,
Yeah.
I run into marketplace people. None of them were talking about faith and work. If they're a
Wow.
believer, but they're not talking about faith and work. They don't
Yeah.
have a basic faith and work theology. The
Yeah.
church is not teaching them. So faith and work is very lack of. And then
Yeah.
as particularly coming from a professional world, we spend 40 hours, 60 hour, 80-hour our life at work.
Yeah.
If you don't have any
Yeah.
concept about that, that's a big miss from your Christian
Yeah.
life. So
Right.
faith and work, and then redemptive entrepreneurship. How do we teach kingdom and redemptive entrepreneurship to the community? Not
Yeah.
just help a couple business literally launch and get off, not just have establish a few business as mission practice. Literally, our community, when we did a survey, 50% of we picked a random kind of
Yeah.
a representative of churches. 50% of church didn't have one businessman. That's crazy if you think about it.
What? Wow.
Yeah. So we're like, okay, so the reason they didn't have it is because of theology, because of teaching,
Yeah.
because of controlled certain thing and hierarchy and all many
Yeah.
reasons. I don't think it's a single reason.
Yeah.
But we gotta change that picture. How do we
Yeah.
from grassroots level get people more involved in business and really see business as a way that get out of poverty, is the
Yeah.
way that create wealth, it's a way that you know solve problem, integrate back to their community. So faith and work or redemptive entrepreneurship is deep,
Yeah.
close to my heart, and
Yeah.
we're right now working a movement, but within it's also a national level ecosystem building involved
Right.
with a few hundred entrepreneurs in our
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And then second piece is leadership. It's hands in hand,
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter entrepreneurship in a civic society and church leadership, NGO practice, or wherever in a community. I do think, post-communism and all of that is that we don't have a good, solid, foundational, value-driven leadership
Yeah.
that modeled and also that is taught and, basically
Yeah.
kind of implemented. Companies are not running that. You rarely run into servant leaders. So pastors are not even servant leaders, many of them.
Because it's a hierarchical society they come out of, right? Historically.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
And with the hierarchy, that kind of culture, you kind of now put Christianity on it,
Yeah.
but the framework didn't change. So imagine you build a church, but still, they're preaching, but the leadership is very much. I don't think some of the pastors' leadership is nothing different than the corrupted politicians. That's how
Right.
they look at leadership.
Yeah.
So they are same generation. They grew up exactly understood leadership that way. It's
Yeah.
about, become the center of it and not delegating, not trusting other, not building
Yeah.
team. There's a lot of that is missing.
Yeah.
So we feel like that's another area we want to
Mm. Mm.
address through our leadership
Yeah.
academy, different type of
Yeah.
trainings, and collaborating with other leaders on holistic leadership training. And
Great.
then the third part is because young, we're still less than 2% Christians, less than 1.5% Christian. So
Yeah.
there's a mass market and a macro level lack
Mm.
of access to learning and resources, and missionaries and agencies translate different books and content, but they're not good at marketing, they don't know how to distribute them well. So we basically run mobile app to solve that issue, become a hub for 30 plus mission agencies and organizations and
Yeah.
publishing house. And that's also kind of how do we, in the end of the day, people change. I think a lot of it start from here and
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
head and heart. So head has to be inspired by ideas and things that they really kind of has to have that
Mm.
alternatives. And there are plenty of great ideas inspired by our God and in the kingdom that needs to be
Yeah.
spread all over the place. So we want to kind of facilitate that. And then
Yeah.
last part is, as we saw, poverty always was treated almost like a disease,
Right.
almost like as a place that people don't want to talk about it or
Yeah.
keep them where is almost like is like a area people didn't have a good theological framework around it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also churches are not addressing poverty in a healthy way. So
Mm.
we looked at that as that okay, pandemic gave us a reason to start that. So we run a large mercy ministry right now with hundreds of homes providing monthly food package through local church and so on. So
Wow.
all in all, these are faith and work, redemptive entrepreneurship, leadership development, learning and resource platform, and then mercy and justice ministry. These are area of things that we've been working through Asia Leadership Development Network.
Fantastic. And people can find that your website. I've looked at it before, but they can find it online.
Yeah, they can find general description of it. If there's more details, definitely you can reach out to us, and we have
Yeah.
more details that we
Yeah.
can provide.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Baolerhu, when we were chatting, I might have mentioned to you, I think we were talking about, I'd written a book recently on households and the power of households and the impact. And one of the things that I think back is, yeah, there's examples in scripture of entire households coming to Christ. And we saw one locally here with some friends recently. But I was fascinated about a story that you told about when you were trekking in Mongolia and you'd put together. Mongolians are open to stories, right? So you put together this chart and this scroll with a whole bunch of stories. Tell us a bit about that, and then tell us about what happened when you went in to share the story in one of these more remote situations.
Yeah, I think nomadic culture has some orality culture to it, and
Yeah.
rural countries like urban city, little different, but rural countryside. When we were in college ministry and church movement, we noticed in order to relate to them, storytelling is the best way to relate to them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
love stories. They love story from the past history, but also modern day. They love stories
Mm.
from the city. They
Yeah.
love because young people are going out and gathering these stories that they will like tell us what's happening. Basically, they have the genuine curiosity with those.
Yeah.
So that's a methodology work and relate with people better. So we had a great idea actually. College student ministry. One of the thing I still love college student ministry.
Yeah.
Part of the thing is like college kids can take risk and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
love new ideas. And so I still remember we had a local art university students in our fellowship, and we were telling them about this and like, hey, how do we share uh, Bible stories? How do we relate to orality people better? And
Yeah.
one of the young guys said, in my spare time, all the Bibles, like when I read stories, I draw them,
No.
like literally sketch them on paper with like really cool. So I said I would like to look at it, and he showed me. It was like, this is so good. This is not just a sketch. This is actually he contextualized the story.
Yeah.
So it's a story. Back then it was first of all, Christianity is young and small, and
Yeah.
so part of it is like the overall culture look at Christianity is from the West. So
Yes.
always believe, oh, you guys, because you learn English, that's why you can accept this. Or because this is from the West, you guys young, that's why.
Yeah.
So part of the breakthrough has to happen is that let them know, hey, God speaks Mongolian and
Yeah.
Jesus loves, he's like into living in our own culture. I mean,
Yeah.
how do we look through that lens?
Yeah.
So his sketching is literally converting everything from
Yeah.
so like the shepherd. I mean, he put in the Mongolian dress. Did we call
Yeah.
them did? Did is the traditional dress, and the Mongolian did. They're sitting there. Jesus, the even the angel show up with Mongolian dress, and so really make the story very much relevant to us. And he's drawing that. I said, could you work with us? I mean, we literally come up with a summer project, and he painted. We picked 16 different story from Bible,
Yeah.
significantly easier for us to point towards
Yeah.
the gospel message, and
Yeah.
then put them around the cloth. And we still remember during the summer we used to print them on a cloth, and then because it's on a cloth, so it's very easy to carry, light, and
Yeah.
roll it, and you can
Yeah.
just put it in your backpack and anything. And typically around that time in Inner Mongolia, also there's a lot of religious kind of persecution going on. If you carry a bigger like Bible and books, people tend to pay can cause more problem. So that
Yeah.
book cloth was very simple, can fold it anywhere, and people don't pay attention. So we used to use that in the countryside and go to
Yeah.
countryside back. And then the cool thing about college students is every summer they're off.
Yeah.
So organically they're all over the country and all
Yeah.
over the region because that's where they're from. So
Yeah.
you're going back to your home. So now go share with your classmates from
Yeah.
childhood. Go share with your relatives. Go share with your friend, or go to share with your distant relatives in the countryside.
Yeah.
So we did that, several summers in a row, and
Yeah.
then that was one of my best memory. And
Yeah.
we would go in a yurt, literally go show up in somewhere. There's a lot of local hospitality. People like pour out milk tea and cheese and anything, hikers going by, and the locals will literally take you in, and we'll sit down and eat with them, and we just bring candies to their kids. And then evening we always like, hey, would you like to hear a story? Then we'll put the story out on the wall of the yurt, and then let the kids pick one story, and they will pick one and we'll share. That's how we've been doing a lot
Yeah.
of sharing in that journey. I think a few summer, one of the most significant story I still vividly remember every bit of it is this story that you mentioned about the whole
Yeah.
household.
Yeah.
Uh, it's actually this story. This happened. This tribe particularly we went to. It's close to my hometown.
Yeah.
Probably very similar to my dad's tribe.
Yeah.
So this summer we hiked 40 days, basically 40 days. Me and three other buddies of mine, we hiked all across this region, basically
Yeah.
meeting hundreds of local, remote, nomadic homes who
Yeah.
don't have accessibility. Otherwise,
Wow.
people wouldn't. If people don't seek them, they wouldn't find them kind of people.
Yeah.
So we're basically tracking them down their summer lands and go visit them and hitchhike, hike. Sometimes we get a horse, sometimes we don't, sometimes we camp out. I mean, just the whole summer I was doing it. And then we arrived in this home and has to be there must be a festivity going on.
Yeah.
It was multiple years together. All their childrens were all coming in from different parts. It was towards the later evening, kind of early evening of the day. So
Yeah.
people were, and then we walked and realized it was somebody's wedding, and they had a
Yeah.
wedding ceremony and different things where they're cleaning up started. So we walked in, and they basically took us in and for a meal. So after meal, we were sitting and just talking, and then I basically did the same drill, started bringing out the class and wanted to share the story. And then a grandpa was there, and he's he's a very stoic kind of emotionless man sitting there.
Yeah.
And then a few of his son, daughter-in-law and women were outside helping, some grandkids there and some probably distant relatives. And then as soon as I started sharing, the grandpa got so angry. I mean, he literally flipped, and we were shocked. This never happened in our life. He got so angry. He basically yelling at us, "Leave right now! Get your
Yeah.
stuff, leave!" And we already put our backpack and sent our tent near next to their yurt. We were
Yeah.
expecting to kind of spend night there nearby, and and he basically he came out of the yurt and then told us, "Get your stuff, leave right now." I mean, it's completely dark outside. We didn't know where we were gonna go. We had some headlights, so we started walking away. So it was a kind of cruel. Four of us, we were all discouraged, and also we didn't know what was wrong. We didn't know
Yeah.
anything. What we did offended them. So
Yeah.
we were just none of us. We didn't even talk. We just
Yeah.
like kind of lowered our head and we walked away with a little shame, fear, and then we walked probably a couple mile away and then camped on the top of a small hill. Uh, that night actually rained. It had some thunderstorm and rained. And then following morning, very early, like sunrise, 4:30 a.m. and 5, we started waking up and packing our stuff that didn't sleep well. It was like the
Yeah.
incident, but also thunderstorm. So we didn't sleep well, packing our stuff. And then we saw two horsemen started coming from the house. We could still see
Yeah.
the yurt and from two or
Yeah.
3 miles away and the two horsemen coming down that way. And then they came, saw us, and they stopped and started waving at us. Come down, basically. So I went down. And it was that grandpa, the older
Okay.
gentleman, and one
Yeah.
of his son. The gentleman basically said, "Well, would you like to have breakfast with us?"
Yeah.
And this is 180-degree change, and I didn't know. I was speechless. I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, okay, yeah, we are hungry. We'd love to have some breakfast. He said, okay, pack your stuff, come. We'll go prepare first.
Yeah.
So they went off and we packed our stuff, showed up their house. My hand was trembling. I didn't know what to do. It was like sitting there and
This is
remember
the
they had
same
put,
guy who kicked you out the night before, right?
that's right. Same guy kicked me out before the night. And then with a little smile now. Instead of
Yeah.
stoic, it was like have smile, and then he would eat. He said, "Eat, have you guys." And then he said, it even shocked me. He said, "Well, last night I kicked you out for your own sake." I was like, "What? What are you talking about? My own sake?" And then he was like, "I kicked you out because when you guys were walking, basically hiking across and come to our house." There was a person who was from police actually was following you. He was not wearing, he was just wearing regular clothes, followed you, came to our house and basically sitting with you guys. So when you brought up the claws, basically wanted to share, and that's a moment he want to catch. And so I sensed that and I saw that. So I interrupted you and kicked you out.
Wow.
So last night after you guys gone, that secret place was basically left. Uh, so basically he said, well, I basically thank you. You should say thank you. I saved you in a sense. And then he was like, now could you tell us the story? I was speechless. I was, in a way that I didn't know, my emotion was going up and down. And I took out the class. I started sharing the shepherd story from Bible,
Yeah.
how he loved the um, lost sheep. He'll go
Yeah.
after deserted 99 sheep, go for the one sheep.
Yeah.
And these are shepherds. These are true shepherds, so they know
Yeah.
how it works.
Yeah.
So he literally, I mean, heard the story. Two of his son and a couple of his grandkids were there, and then he after he heard the story, and then of course the message points towards our heavenly Father. He
Yeah.
will desert the 99, go after the one
Yeah.
who is hurting for him, who is suffering, who is deserted, who's lonely, who is
Yeah.
there, who is unknown.
Yeah.
And then he basically said, could you say, wait a second, could you say that again? Tell us the story again. And then he told his son, he said, go get all the daughter-in-laws
Yeah.
and get my wife. All the women's are out still cleaning from the last night's, wedding kind of leftover stuff. So they all came in. I mean, literally the whole yurt is full, packed with people on the floor
Yeah.
and standing. And I shared the story again. And then this is the grandpa's comment afterwards. He said, isn't this the shepherd we have been waiting for?
Wow.
And the whole room is so quiet. And then he said, well, this is definitely the shepherd we've been waiting for. He's been looking for us all these years. And we are here, and he found us. And then he basically, at that moment, he asked all his son and granddaughter, said, uh, basically the whole family, 22 people,
Mm.
including kids and all everybody said, let's how do I accept this shepherd?
Yeah.
So that's how they accepted Jesus at that same day. In my lifetime, I led many people to Christ, but I've never led 22 people who is the same household, who was led by a wise man who
Yeah.
protected us, but dramatically changed the scenario. And then also heard the story, knowing the gospel, center of the gospel message. The
Mm.
center of the gospel message is not us pursuing God. It's
Yeah.
actually God's endless pursuit of us. And
Yeah.
he got it. He not only
Yeah.
got it, he said he know it. He said, lifelong I've been waiting for him. And we
Wow.
search in him, and he's endlessly pursuing us. And he said, not only that, because it's an elderly community, and he made decision. He asked his children, "Isn't this the shepherd?" And all his children said, "Yes, this is the God we're looking for, waiting for
Yeah.
us."
Yeah.
So we accepted Jesus, and that was the story. That was the probably a story that I'm most proud of and memorable, and just
Yeah.
something that speaks deeply in my conviction of God's love and uh,
Mm.
um, to us and to me personally, to my people and to that
Yeah.
family. And so I every time I share with this story, it's just with a lot of joy and
Yeah.
emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. Baolerhu, thank you so much for sharing it. And it's just my encouragement to people listening to this podcast is several things. One is raise your faith level to expect a whole household to come to Christ. It happened many times in scripture. There's 4 times in the book of Acts we see Noah building an ark for the salvation of his house, God making a covenant with Abraham and his household. I find 162 references to household in scripture. So raise your expectation. The second thing is the shepherd story is not going to work for your neighbor who's running an IT company. Learn to explain the kingdom of God in terms of other people's industries and in terms of your own industry. And so, I don't think that Jesus walked down the road and decided, what's a cool story? Oh, I'll tell them about a vineyard. I'm the vine. I think they walked past a vineyard and they saw, and he said, I'm the vine. They went past a bakery and he said, I'm the bread of life. Past a field with sheep and he said, I'm the good shepherd, and so forth. I think he knew how to relate the kingdom to everyday industry. So my encouragement is write the gospel story in your industry, in industry language that you can explain to other people. I met a lady once, got to know her a little bit, Wendy Jones, and she was in the IT industry. And so she's written a book, and it's all about, connections and networking and sprockets and streams and TCP/IP and protocols, all of these things that a technical geek would understand, but just to explain the kingdom of God and how it all works. So that's my real encouragement, that if you're talking to an investment banker or to anybody else, do it for the people in your industry, be able to relate it that way, rather than telling them some weird story that they don't understand. Because, we have a friend who came to South Africa with us from India, and he'd read the Bible, but he'd never seen a vine before. Wow, that's a vine, because it's not his, it wasn't in his language, it wasn't in his culture, just as for somebody else, a shepherd and a sheep is a foreign thing. For that guy, it was so close and so personal. I also just love a third thing from that about how God puts eternity in the hearts of men. For you, Baolerhu, your own story, when you're young, you know when something's right or wrong, and you have a greater yearning for an integrated life that's authentic and real. And for that gentleman, for the older man who's been expecting a shepherd to come and find them. I mean, that's just an amazing story. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I have a friend, Dudley, who's just wonderful in sharing the gospel with people. And his presumption is that God is at work in everybody's life. So whether he goes to get a haircut, or he goes to the town square, or goes to the market, and he's talking to people, he's not trying to force his conversation on them, but he's asking the questions just on the assumption that God's already at work in their life in some way, shape, or form. And it's lovely to see that in your own story, Baolerhu.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think it's, like I said, the counterculture narrative in this is rest of the religion. I grew up, legalism, Buddhism, everything I grew up is you have to earn your right. You have to do better. You have to be more holy. You have to be more just. You have to even pay more to the monk, and you get to earn your rankings. And everything is about your own behavior change.
Yeah.
But the one piece in this has been missing is grace. And for us, none of those worked, and because it's by human performance in a sense. It was not by God's grace. The opposite of that is basically that, shepherd, older gentleman said, God has been relentlessly pursuing us. Just like, because he is a shepherd, he knows it doesn't matter storm or not. If his horse got lost, he will leave everything, he will go get them. He knows if one of the sheep gets stuck in the fence really far away, it doesn't matter how cold, -40 or winter storm, he was going to go get them. So he knows the pursuit of that, and he related that so well with God's own heart. And I think, that's where his grace and mercy. And for me, without his grace, we wouldn't have chance to do it again. We wouldn't have the chance of forgiveness, without his grace. And so much more in this, and understanding his love and grace.
So Baolerhu, historically, however many years ago, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Mongolians went all over the world. Just a vast expanse of the empire. Is it your hope that Mongolians will be going out, taking the kingdom to different parts of the world again?
Well, I believe, each culture, each people group has own unique characteristics that God has given them. What nomadic culture taught me, I grew up in there, that I appreciate about what my culture has given me is relative sense of a few things. It's adaptability. It's wherever you go, you can settle and do things.
Yeah.
And that's such a nature. If you become a
Yeah.
cross-culture missionaries and so on, it's such a great strength to have. You
Yeah.
can, if I've done it since my childhood, every 3 months, changing land, probably biologically, habitually, I learned, I can move my suitcase across to Knoxville, Tennessee, or
Yeah.
Chattanooga or Sacramento. I could settle,
Yeah.
probably, be resourceful and all of that. And second is that just, I think one of the beauty of nomadic culture I really appreciate is the curiosity.
Mm.
People are curious about what's out there, out the
Yeah.
mind. It's the
Yeah.
simplicity of that.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think, well, Genghis Khan has such a complex strategy and desire, and he built the biggest empire in the world. No, I don't think that was he. It wasn't a complex to have a strategy to build the empire. Just out of his curiosity, he want to see the ocean. He want to see the end of the earth. He want to
Yeah.
see where is the stretch of the empire. When
Yeah.
he get there, he literally was done. He's like, I'm done. I
Yeah.
actually my goal is accomplished. I already see the ocean, and he was joined his army. And that's not a modern day
Yeah.
warfare, and that people
Yeah.
doesn't do that. And
Yeah.
that's also reflect the
Yeah.
cultural norm to it.
Yeah.
There are sayings in a world that say, well, if we were able to, warriors that built the empire and all of that, would there be a significant roles Mongolian church can play in God's kingdom?
Yeah.
Uh, I I don't know. I don't choose one side or the other, and
Yeah.
I'm not a overtly, basically you said about kingdom citizenship. I'm not a very nationalistic person either, and I
Yeah.
don't want to put that, hey, American church can save the world, the Mongolian church now it's Chinese church. I don't believe in that. I think
Yeah.
it's today basically the world has evolved. God is writing His own history of redemption through civilization after civilization and rise and falls
Yeah.
of that, but also telling similar stories. But also it's up to His sovereignty and His grace to use whatever He wants to.
Yeah.
We could have the greatest strengths, but God may not use us.
Mm.
Bible over and over taught that.
Yeah.
So it's also our heart and desire aligned with God. I think that's where the significance being used by God. And then I think the word also is not today is not just country and border anymore. You just
Yeah.
mentioned about industry. Today, word is you have, the places gospel message hasn't gone there, and Coca-Cola is already there.
Yeah.
Corporates, this is a culture, digital world, people are relating. So the
Yeah.
borderless culture and how culture evolve in generation after generation is very, very different. In this complex world, I do believe church needs to equip the saints.
Yeah.
That's wherever in Mongolian church or here in America or in South Africa,
Yeah.
we need to equip our people to relate, to understand, to live out the gospel message, but also relate to wherever the territory, the sphere, and culture they are placed into. I
Yeah.
think only in that way we can truly be used by God.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're always isn't almost like an colonization. It's always like
Mm.
always had an objection and then come in and try to change that. I think that over and over in the history uh, proved that it doesn't work that way. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
sustain that way. So
Yeah.
I think it's a much more organic, redemptive sacrifice needs to happen. Sacrifice is not invasion. It's not taking over. It's a way of living
Yeah.
that we become less, God become more. And
Yeah.
how do we love our neighbors? How do we love our enemies? How do we love our cross culture? How do we serve the least of these? How do we look at the culture that hostile to us? So
Mm.
many places. So I think it's a uh, kingdom way of living is very different than building Mongolian empire again on all of that. And it's such a different way. I do
Yes.
believe that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's lovely to see you with, recognizing the power of business and entrepreneurship, leadership, and so forth as a vehicle to get you into any country, any nation, any situation, because it's a vehicle for serving a broad number of people. So, Baolerhu, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks for sharing your story. Fascinating journey. very few of us grew up in yurts, although there's probably a few guys in huts in Africa who grew up in huts in Africa who can relate to you. But and very few of us had a nomadic life, although nowadays we have the digital nomads theoretically, like the laptop brigade, you know. But no, that's great. It's awesome. Been great to hear your story, and thanks for the wonderful story about that amazing encounter you had with the head of the household and his group of people in their collection of yurts. Just an amazing story. Thank you so much, Baolerhu, for sharing with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure.